Long before anyone carved a road through northern Luzon, before rice terraces climbed the mountains and villages gathered along the Cagayan River, the island stood apart, forest pressed against limestone. Rivers wandered through broad valleys and vanished into caves. Storms arrived from the Pacific with little warning, while rain and drought remade the ground repeatedly. To the west lay the South China Sea. To the east, the Philippine Sea. Deep channels separated Luzon from the rest of Asia. Even when Ice Age sea levels fell and coastlines stretched outward, the island was never joined to the continent. Something had to cross the water to reach it. That fact hangs over the mystery. Luzon was not a corner of a mainland world where animals and people could simply wander in. It was a destination beyond a barrier. Reaching it required chance, persistence, or movement across sea passages that never disappeared completely. The first arrivals may not have understood the shape of the island or the distances between shores. They may have seen only a dark line on the horizon, cloud over unseen mountains, or birds moving toward land at dusk. Whatever brought them there, the crossing placed them inside a world where isolation could change almost everything. Northern Luzon is a landscape of sharp contrasts. The Sierra Madre rises along the eastern side, catching rain from the Pacific and feeding tropical forests. To the west stand the Cordillera Mountains, deeply cut by rivers. Between them stretches the Cagayan Valley, a corridor of floodplains, grasslands, woodlands, and changing waterways. During the Pleistocene, this region did not look as it does today. Cooler and drier intervals alternated with warmer, wetter ones. Forests expanded and contracted. Rivers moved. Animals adjusted their ranges or disappeared. Yet the island remained enclosed by sea, its populations exposed to a peculiar evolutionary pressure survival within limits. On islands, size and shape can become unstable over long periods. Large mammals may grow smaller when food is restricted and predators are few. Small animals may grow larger when competition changes. Bodies can be reshaped by terrain, diet, vegetation, and island habitat. These patterns are real, but they are not automatic rules. Every island tells its own story, and Luzon's evidence remains incomplete. Still, isolation creates possibilities that a continental landscape may not. A population cut off for thousands of generations can retain old features, lose others, or develop new combinations that seem contradictory beside relatives elsewhere. The ancient fauna of Luzon hints at how strange that process could become. The island once held extinct deer, unusual rodents, reptiles, and a species of rhinoceros. Some lineages may have arrived by rare dispersal events, perhaps swept by storms or carried on natural rafts. Others may have evolved after long isolation. Their presence shows that the sea was a filter, not an absolute wall. It blocked ordinary movement but occasionally allowed extraordinary crossings. Each successful arrival began a new experiment, governed by limited space, shifting resources, and separation from the populations left behind. Among those experiments was a human lineage unknown to archaeology until recently. Its members left no known cities, inscriptions, graves, or art. No complete skeleton has been found. No skull preserves facial proportions or the size of the brain. No genome has survived the heat and humidity. What remains is astonishingly small, a handful of teeth and bones from fingers, feet, and part of a thigh. Yet those fragments show that another kind of human once existed on Luzon, one whose anatomy fits no familiar category. Before we go deeper, Take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The story ahead depends not on a spectacular tomb or buried city, but on details measured in millimeters: the curve of a toe bone, the branching of a tooth root, the thickness of enamel, the ancient chemistry locked inside mineralized tissue. From such traces, scientists are trying to reconstruct a population whose entire known existence has been reduced to 13 fossils. The island itself is the first piece of evidence. Any explanation for these people must begin with geography. Their ancestors could not reach Luzon by walking across a continuous land bridge from mainland Asia. Lower sea levels exposed larger areas of the Sunda Shelf to the southwest, joining many modern islands, but Luzon lay beyond deep channels. Coastlines shifted, and distances between visible islands may sometimes have narrowed. Even so, at least one water crossing was unavoidable. That does not prove the travellers were skilled sailors. They may have used simple floating materials, moved between islands in stages, or survived a rare accidental drift. Scholars still debate how much planning early hominins possessed in such settings. A single castaway would not establish a lasting population, however, so the presence of a distinct lineage suggests either repeated arrivals or a group large enough to reproduce after reaching land. The evidence cannot tell us which possibility is correct. Once there, they entered a difficult environment. Tropical abundance can be deceptive. Forests contain food, but much of it is seasonal, scattered, protected by shells, hidden underground, or high in the canopy. Heavy rain accelerates decay. Rivers flood. Typhoons flatten vegetation and alter coastlines. Volcanic activity, earthquakes, and landslides periodically reshape the island. Survival would have required flexibility, memory, and detailed knowledge of local terrain. Yet nearly every specific statement about how these people lived remains an inference. Their diet is unknown. Their tools are not securely identified. Even whether they used caves regularly cannot be established simply because their bones were found in one. The mystery grows darker because time on Luzon is not represented by a continuous sequence. At Kalinga, unidentified hominins processed a rhinoceros carcass roughly 709,000 years ago. Far later, fossils from Callao Cave reveal Homo Luzonensis, with some specimens at least 50,000 to 67,000 years old, and one tooth reported at about 134,000 years. Between these traces lies more than 500,000 years of silence. It may conceal continuity, replacement, repeated migration, or extinction followed by recolonization. No single explanation fully accounts for what is missing. So northern Luzon appears not merely as the backdrop to the story, but as one of its main forces. Water-isolated populations, mountains divided habitats, forests imposed their own demands. Geological time erased almost everything. Somewhere within that long sequence, a group of hominins crossed into the island world and changed there. Their descendants, or perhaps another population that arrived later, eventually entered the limestone chambers of Callao. What happened before that moment is still hidden beneath river sediment, cave deposits, and tropical soil. What survives begins with almost nothing, one small bone, overlooked among animal remains, waiting for someone to realize that it belonged to a human no one had known existed. The bone did not announce itself as the beginning of a new human species. It appeared in 2007 during excavation at Callao Cave, mixed among the remains of animals and fragments of an older landscape. The cave lies in the limestone country of northern Luzon, near the Cagayan Valley, where chambers open into darkness above river-cut terrain. Archaeologists had come looking for evidence of ancient human occupation, but the first decisive clue was so modest that it could easily have remained unnoticed: a third metatarsal from the right foot, a small bone from the middle of the foot. The excavation was led by Armand Salvador Mijares, whose work at Callao formed part of a larger effort to understand when humans first reached the Philippines. At the time, the accepted picture of deep prehistory in the region was already becoming less simple. Archaeological sites across island Southeast Asia suggested that early hominins had crossed water barriers long before modern boats or navigation, yet the Philippine record remained sparse. Tropical soils, heat, moisture, and repeated disturbance are unforgiving to bone. Even when fossils survive, they may be fragmentary, mineralized, or difficult to distinguish from other mammals. The metatarsal, later catalogued as CCH1, was not immediately identified as human. Philip Piper recognized it while examining faunal material from the excavation. One of the most important discoveries in recent human evolution did not emerge as a dramatic skeleton exposed in the floor of a cave. It was found through careful sorting, comparison, and the slow recognition that a bone placed among animal remains had proportions and structure belonging to the genus Homo. Published in 2010, the first study treated CCH1 cautiously. Its anatomy confirmed that it came from a hominin, but a single foot bone could not justify a new species. The researchers referred it to Homo without claiming whether it belonged to Homo sapiens, an unusual population of Homo erectus, or something else. Direct uranium series dating produced a minimum age of about 66,700 years, with an uncertainty of roughly 1,000 years. This placed a human presence in northern Luzon far earlier than many scholars had expected from the evidence then available. The word minimum matters. Uranium series dating does not always provide a simple birthday for a fossil. Mineral movement after burial can complicate the history recorded in bone. The result for CCH1 indicated that the specimen was at least approximately that old. Not that every object in the cave belonged to the same moment. The evidence remains incomplete, and the dating of Callao would later prove more complicated still. Even so, the foot bone transformed the cave from an interesting archaeological location into a site with implications for the peopling of the region. A human on Luzon more than 66,000 years ago had already crossed a major geographic threshold. The island had never been connected directly to mainland Asia during the Quaternary. Someone, or the ancestors of someone, had passed over deep water. In 2010, however, the identity of that traveller remained unknowable. One bone could establish presence, but not appearance, ancestry, culture, or whether the individual belonged to a long-established island population. The response was therefore measured. CCH1 was important but frustrating. It had no skull beside it, no complete leg, no clearly associated toolkit, and no DNA. Its size was small, but smallness alone carries little taxonomic meaning. Modern humans vary. Bones from different species can overlap in dimensions. Island environments can alter body size, but invoking island dwarfism without a sequence of fossils would have gone beyond the evidence. For several years, the Callao hominin existed in scientific literature as a question attached to a single foot bone. Then the cave yielded more. Further excavations in 2011 and 2015 recovered additional human remains from the same site: teeth, finger bones, toe and foot bones, and part of a femoral shaft from an immature individual. The collection remained tiny, but it was no longer anatomically silent. Teeth preserve a remarkable amount of evolutionary information. Their crowns, roots, enamel, internal junctions, and relative proportions can retain patterns that distinguish populations even when the rest of the skeleton is gone. Finger and toe bones can reveal aspects of joint form, muscle attachment, and locomotor anatomy, though never enough on their own to reconstruct a complete way of moving. By the time the material was assembled, 13 fossils could be attributed to at least 3 individuals, 2 adults and 1 immature individual. 7 were teeth, 2 were finger bones, 3 came from the foot or toes, 1 was a section of thigh bone. There was still no skull, no complete jaw, no pelvis, and no skeleton from which height or body mass could be calculated with confidence. Yet the fossils did not fit comfortably inside the variation known for Homo sapiens. The teeth were especially difficult to explain. They were generally small, but some premolars were relatively large compared with the molars. Several roots were unexpectedly complex. The molars decreased in size toward the back of the tooth row. Some features resembled Asian Homo erectus. Others appeared closer to Homo sapiens. Still others recalled much earlier hominins. The hand and foot bones added another contradiction, preserving curvature and muscle attachment patterns that looked more archaic than the late date seemed to permit. No single feature proved the existence of a separate species. Classification in paleoanthropology rarely works through one dramatic trait. What mattered was the mosaic, a combination of characteristics not seen together in any recognized member of Homo. Scholars still debate how much difference is enough to name a species from fragmentary material, especially on an island where isolation can produce unusual anatomy. But the Callao remains had become too distinctive to dismiss as merely small modern humans. In 2019, Mijares and an international team formally named Homo Luzonensis. The species name tied the fossils to Luzon, but the announcement did not solve the central mystery. It gave the mystery a scientific label. The holotype consisted of 5 associated teeth, CCH6A through CCH6E, belonging to 1 adult. Other teeth and postcranial bones were assigned to the same species because of their morphology and archaeological context. The claim rested on a sparse collection, but one rich in anatomical conflict. The cave had now produced evidence of a human lineage unlike any previously documented, yet each new answer opened another absence. There was no face to look upon, no brain case to measure, no complete hand or foot, and no secure cultural tradition. The fossils established that Homo Luzonensis existed, but they offered only fragments of existence. Callao Cave had not delivered a portrait. It had delivered 13 pieces of a body scattered across time, leaving science to decide whether they belong to one enduring island lineage, several visits by related populations, or a deeper history still concealed in the limestone. By the time CCH1 entered the scientific record, its importance reached far beyond the floor of Callao Cave. The small third metatarsal did not merely add an earlier date to Philippine prehistory. It forced researchers to reconsider the routes by which ancient humans moved through island Southeast Asia, and it did so with almost none of the evidence usually preferred for such an argument. There was no skull to compare, no associated settlement spread across a broad layer, and no unmistakable technology pointing toward a known population. There was only 1 foot bone, mineralized in tropical darkness, carrying a minimum age of roughly 66 to 700 years. That date mattered because older models often imagine human movement through the region in terms of exposed land. During glacial periods, sea levels fell by more than 100 meters, joining mainland Southeast Asia to Sumatra, Java, and Borneo across the immense Sunda Shelf. Large areas that are now seabed became plains crossed by rivers, animals, and hominins. it was possible to travel much farther south and east without open ocean navigation than modern maps suggest. But Luzon remained outside that connected world. Deep channels persisted around the Philippine archipelago, and even the lower sea levels did not create a dry corridor from the Asian mainland to northern Luzon. CCH1 therefore represented more than presence. It represented arrival across water. The bone could not reveal whether that crossing had been deliberate, repeated, accidental, or spread across several generations of island hopping. It could not tell whether the travellers built rafts or clung to naturally floating vegetation after a storm. Yet it showed that the sea had not prevented hominins from reaching Luzon. A barrier once treated as a likely boundary had become part of a migration route, however poorly understood. The challenge was not entirely unprecedented. Homo Floresiensis had already demonstrated that an archaic human lineage once lived on Flores, another island that required a sea crossing. Stone tools from Flores suggested hominin presence there hundreds of thousands of years before the late surviving fossils. Even so, Luzon expanded the geographic scale of the problem. It implied that multiple island systems in Southeast Asia had been reached by non-modern hominins, perhaps at different times and through different processes. The old image of island dispersal as an exceptional achievement of Homo sapiens could no longer remain intact. Still, one must resist turning a geographic fact into a technological certainty. Water crossing is unavoidable in the explanation, but advanced seafaring is not. A coastline seen from another island can invite movement without requiring maps, sails, or long-distance navigation. Lower sea levels may have reduced some gaps and exposed intermediate islands. Typhoons could also produce accidental transport, though the survival of a breeding population would likely require more than one fortunate individual. Scholars still debate whether early crossings reflect purposeful exploration, repeated low-probability drift events, or simple technologies that leave no archaeological trace. CCH1 also complicated the timeline of modern human expansion. In 2010, an age beyond 66,000 years placed a hominin on Luzon near or before many commonly discussed dates for widespread Homo sapiens dispersal through the region. The specimen could not be confidently assigned to modern humans, and its morphology did not settle the matter. This uncertainty created an uncomfortable possibility. The earliest known human presence in the northern Philippines might belong to a lineage other than our own. The word human can hide this distinction. In everyday speech, it usually means Homo sapiens. In paleoanthropology, it can refer more broadly to members of the genus Homo, including populations with very different bodies and evolutionary histories. CCH1 belonged somewhere within that wider family, but a single metatarsal could not identify where. Its proportions resembled Homo closely enough to establish a hominin presence, yet not enough to separate species. The discovery changed the map before it provided name. Dating itself demanded equal caution. Uranium series analysis measures radioactive decay within minerals absorbed by bone after burial. Because bones exchange elements with surrounding sediment, the resulting age may represent a minimum rather than the exact moment of death. CCH1's reported minimum age of 700 years was robust enough to establish deep antiquity, but it did not mean the individual died on a precisely known day in the late Pleistocene, nor did it date every fossil later recovered from the cave. That distinction would become increasingly important as different Callao specimens produced different chronological signals. The cave deposits were not a single sealed instant. Sediments accumulated, shifted, hardened, and were disturbed over long periods. Water moved through limestone. Minerals entered buried tissue. Animals and humans may have entered this cave at widely separated times. Archaeology inside such a setting requires more than measuring depth and assuming that every object nearby belongs together. Stratigraphy, direct dating, sediment history, and taphonomy must be combined, and even then the result can remain provisional. This is why the later report concerning CCH9, a third molar attributed to Homo Luzonensis, altered the story so sharply. A 2023 review reported an age of approximately 134,000 years, with an uncertainty of about 14,000 years for that particular tooth. The result did not make all Callao fossils 134,000 years old. It suggested instead that at least one individual may have been present tens of thousands of years earlier than the familiar 50,000 to 67,000 year range. If sustained by further study, the cave may record separate episodes of occupation extending across a remarkably long span. The possibility changes what CCH1 represents. It may not mark an early arrival at all. It could belong to a population already established on Luzon for many millennia. Alternatively, the older tooth and younger remains may represent different groups linked only by similar anatomy. A lineage could have persisted, vanished, returned, or been replaced. No continuous fossil sequence currently connects these moments. What survives in the record suggests depth, but not continuity. Even before Homo Luzonensis was named, then, CCH1 had broken two assumptions at once. It showed that early humans reached an island that always required a sea crossing, and it warned that the chronology of Philippine settlement could not be reduced to a single late migration by modern humans. The bone's small size made its implications easy to underestimate. Yet from that one fragment emerged a broader vision of Southeast Asian prehistory, not a simple frontier waiting for Homo sapiens, but an archipelago entered repeatedly by different human populations. The map had changed, but it had not become clearer. New islands appeared inside the human story, connected by crossings no one could reconstruct. Dates moved backward. Unknown lineages occupied spaces once left blank, and in Callao Cave, the first bone remained what it had always been, not an answer, but a point of entry into a history far older and more crowded than anyone had expected. To understand the people represented at Callao, it helps to step backward beyond the cave and imagine Luzon before any known hominin had entered its valleys. The island was already ancient, assembled through tectonic collisions, volcanic activity, uplift, and erosion. Mountain chains rose along its margins. Limestone formed where seas had once covered the land, then fractured into cliffs, sinkholes, caverns, and underground channels. Rivers carried sediment into the Cagayan Basin, while forests repeatedly advanced and retreated as climate shifted. Long before a human foot touched the island, Luzon was a changing world with its own evolutionary history. The Pleistocene did not produce one permanent landscape. Cooler glacial phases alternated with warmer intervals, and the balance between forest, woodland, and open ground changed over thousands of years. Northern Luzon could at times support broad grassier areas in the valley, while wetter slopes and ravines retained dense vegetation. Monsoon strength varied. Typhoons, floods, volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes altered local habitats far more abruptly. An animal population adapted to one century could face a different pattern of food, water, and shelter in another. Even at the lowest sea levels, the island remained separated from the Asian mainland. The exposed Sunda Shelf created an enormous western landmass linking parts of modern Southeast Asia. But Luzon stood beyond deep marine channels. Coastlines also moved outward during glacial lows and withdrew during warm intervals, repeatedly changing bays, estuaries, and the distances visible from shore. These shifts could make some crossings shorter without ever eliminating the final water barrier that defined Luzon's isolation. Its separation did not mean emptiness. Animals reached it through rare dispersal events over immense spans of time. Once established, some lineages changed in ways shaped by limited territory and separation from relatives elsewhere. Luzon became a biological laboratory, although the phrase can sound more orderly than evolution really is. There was no planned experiment, only survival, reproduction, chance, and repeated environmental pressure. The extinct rhinoceros of Luzon is one of the clearest reminders that large animals somehow crossed into this island system. Deer also lived there, along with pigs, reptiles, and distinctive small mammals. Rodents are especially revealing because the Philippines preserves remarkable endemic diversity. Some lineages evolved into forms found nowhere else on Earth. Their history shows that islands can preserve ancient branches while also producing rapid change. Isolation protects difference, but it can also make populations vulnerable when climate or habitat shifts. The rhinoceros was not merely an exotic inhabitant, it belonged to an ecosystem of grazing, browsing, predation, scavenging, and competition. In the Cagayan Valley, open or mixed habitats may have offered grasses, shrubs, and river-edge vegetation. Larger mammals moved through floodplains and lowlands, leaving tracks that vanished with the next season. Forest margins provided fruit, roots, leaves, insects, and smaller animals. The exact composition varied through time, and scholars still debate how extensive open environments were during different phases. What survives in pollen, sediments, animal fossils, and stable isotopes offers fragments rather than a single panoramic view. For an arriving hominin, this world would have been both rich and unfamiliar. Tropical landscapes can appear generous, but usable calories are unevenly distributed. Fruit ripens seasonally, tubers may be difficult to locate and process. Animal prey can be elusive in dense vegetation. Heat increases water needs, while humidity speeds spoilage and decay. Heavy rainfall can erase tracks, scatter remains, and transform a familiar path into a flooded channel. Knowledge of place would matter as much as strength where water remained during dry periods. Which plants were safe when animals gathered, and which slopes became dangerous after rain. No direct evidence tells us how the earliest hominins on Luzon acquired that knowledge. The Kalinga site shows that an unidentified population was present by roughly 709,000 years ago and used stone tools to process a rhinoceros carcass. It does not reveal whether those hominins had recently arrived or belonged to generations already adapted to the island. It also does not show whether they hunted the animal. The carcass may have been scavenged or encountered after injury or natural death. The careful statement is narrower. Someone used stone implements to cut flesh and break bone for marrow. That event occurred in a landscape very different in detail from the one encountered by the later Callao population. More than 500,000 years separates Kalinga from even the oldest, presently reported Homo Luzonensis specimen. During that interval, rivers shifted course, species changed, and populations could have arrived or vanished repeatedly. It is tempting to draw a continuous line from the rhinoceros butchers to the humans of Callao, but the fossil record does not provide that bridge. The silence between them is too large. The island's geology helped create the silence. Tropical acidity destroys bone. Water percolating through soil dissolves and redistributes minerals. Roots break deposits apart. Floods carry remains away from where death occurred. Carnivores and scavengers scatter skeletons. In caves, preservation can improve, but even there sediments may be reworked, and only a minute fraction of the dead ever enters a chamber where fossilization becomes possible. The 13 known remains of Homo Luzonensis are not evidence that only 3 individuals existed. They are evidence that 3 individuals happened to leave pieces that survived and were found. Callao Cave itself formed within this long limestone history. Its chambers offered shelter from direct weather, but they were not sealed archives. Water, animals, sediment, and humans entered at different times. A cave can serve as refuge, hunting stop, burial place, accidental trap, or simply a location where bones are washed and deposited. Finding human remains inside does not prove permanent residence. Without hearths, securely associated tools, repeated living surfaces, or other clear behavioral traces tied to the fossils, the function of the cave remains uncertain. The wider island therefore matters more than the chamber alone. Homo Luzonensis was not created by the cave. Its lineage developed across forests, valleys, ridges, coasts, and river systems that archaeology has barely sampled. Callao preserves the end of a long chain of events, not the beginning. Somewhere beyond its entrance, ancestors reproduced in small populations, responded to changing food and terrain, and accumulated the anatomical differences later recorded in teeth and limb bones. By the time the first known Callao individual lived, Luzon had already filtered life through isolation for hundreds of thousands of years. It had admitted rare arrivals, separated them from their source populations, and subjected them to repeated climatic and ecological change. The island was not a passive stage waiting for a human actor. It was an active force in the story, narrowing possibilities, rewarding flexibility, and hiding nearly every trace afterward. The people of Callao emerge from that deep landscape, and their strange anatomy may preserve, in miniature, the history of living where the sea closed every ordinary road. The sea around Luzon was never merely empty space between places. It shaped who could arrive, how often they could arrive, and whether a small group could survive after land disappeared behind them. During glacial periods, shorelines expanded and some islands drew closer together, but the deep channels around Luzon remained. No broad plain opened from mainland Asia to its northern valleys. Any hominin population that reached the island had to cross water at least once, and probably more than once if the journey unfolded through a chain of islands. That geographic fact is certain. Almost everything about the crossing is not. It is easy to imagine a purposeful voyage, a group selecting timber, binding a raft, watching currents, carrying food, and steering toward a distant shore. Such a scene is vivid, but the archaeological record does not support that detail. No boat survives, no paddle, rope, sail, or shoreline camp can be assigned to the ancestors of Homo Luzonensis. The travellers may have used simple floating materials, but they may also have been carried by storm debris, trapped on vegetation mats, or pushed offshore by currents after a flood. Even deliberate movement need not have resembled later seafaring. A short crossing toward visible land demands different knowledge from navigation across an unseen ocean. Lower sea levels would have changed the journey. Coastlines extended outward, estuaries shifted, and islands that are now distant may have appeared closer from elevated ground. Smoke, birds, cloud formations, or the outline of mountains could reveal land beyond the horizon. Yet reduced distance did not remove risk. Currents in the Philippine region are complex, and monsoon winds reverse seasonally. typhoons can drive floating material far from shore. A crossing successful in one direction might be impossible to repeat. Accidental dispersal is possible, but it creates another problem. A single individual rarely establishes a lasting population. Even several survivors may fail if they are closely related, injured, or unable to find sufficient food. The existence of an enduring lineage implies a viable founding group, repeated arrivals, or both. Population biology sets limits that the image of one fortunate castaway tends to ignore. Scholars still debate how many individuals would have been required and how often new migrants reach the island. The evidence cannot distinguish a single rare colonization from a long sequence of small movements. The age of the Kalinga site pushes this problem deep into the Pleistocene. By about 709,000 years ago, unidentified hominins were already present on Luzon, using stone tools to process a rhinoceros carcass. Whoever they were, their presence shows that water barriers had been crossed long before the known Callao fossils. But Kalinga contains no hominin bone. It does not reveal whether those toolmakers belong to the ancestry of Homo Luzonensis, represented an earlier population that later vanished, or arrived in a separate dispersal. A much later tooth from Callao, CCH9 has been reported at approximately 134,000 years old, with a substantial margin of uncertainty. If that age is confirmed, it narrows part of the chronological gap but does not close it. More than 500,000 years still separates Kalinga from the oldest currently reported Homo Luzonensis fossil. Across that span, Luzon could have received multiple populations. Some may have survived briefly. Others may have persisted long enough to change anatomically. The island may have been crossed repeatedly by different branches of the human family. The wider region now makes such crossings less extraordinary than they once seemed. Flores required a sea passage and preserves evidence of hominins far earlier than its famous late fossils. Stone tools reported from Sulawesi at more than 1,000,000 years old indicate that another isolated island was reached astonishingly early. These discoveries do not identify the travellers to Luzon, and they do not prove a shared maritime tradition. They show that early hominins entered island environments across deep water on several occasions. Capability, however, is not the same as intention. Archaeologists often face a temptation to convert outcomes into plans. Because hominins arrived, it is assumed they meant to arrive. Because a population survived, it is assumed the crossing was organized. Neither conclusion necessarily follows. Repeated accidental transport, simple near-shore movement, or opportunistic use of natural floats could produce colonization over long periods. Conversely, the absence of preserved boats does not prove that none existed. Organic materials vanish quickly in tropical conditions. The most honest account leaves several possibilities open. The anatomy of Homo Luzonensis offers no direct solution. Curved finger and toe bones may suggest frequent climbing or movement through a vertically complex environment, but they say nothing about paddling, balance on watercraft, or long-distance navigation. Small teeth reveal evolutionary history, not maritime skill. Without associated coastal sites or a securely linked technology, the crossing remains inferred from geography and presence. Even the direction of arrival is uncertain. The ancestors may have approached from the west through island chains connected to the Sunda region, from the south through other parts of the Philippine archipelago, or by routes now submerged beneath post-glacial seas. Modern coastlines conceal many Pleistocene landscapes, camps once established near beaches, river mouths, or mangroves may lie underwater or beneath thick sediment. The map used to imagine migration is incomplete before the journey even begins. What survives in the record suggests that the sea was not an absolute boundary to archaic humans, but a selective barrier. It permitted rare success and erased almost every trace of how success occurred. Each crossing placed a small population into isolation, where chance and local adaptation could become unusually powerful. Founder effects might narrow genetic diversity. Limited resources could favor smaller bodies. Forested terrain might reward different forms of movement. Over generations, descendants could become anatomically unlike the population from which they came. This possibility lies at the center of the emerging explanation for Homo Luzonensis. The lineage may not represent an ancient African form wandering unchanged into the Philippines. A 2026 phylogenetic analysis instead gives greater support to a relationship with Asian Homo erectus, followed by substantial evolution on Luzon. Under that model, the most dramatic transformation happened after the sea crossing. Isolation, reduced body size, tropical forest use, and evolutionary convergence may have produced traits that appear unexpectedly archaic. Still, the crossing comes first, before teeth changed, before toe bones curved in their distinctive way. Before Callao Cave received the remains of at least 3 individuals, a population had to enter a world with no land route home. Whether carried by catastrophe or guided by intention, they passed beyond a boundary that older theories treated as nearly impassable. The water did not simply separate Luzon from Asia. It created the conditions under which a human lineage could become something new, then preserved no memory of the journey except the fact that, somehow, it had been made. The fossils from Callao do not form a body, they form a contradiction. A few teeth suggest one pattern, the hand and foot bones suggest another. Paleoanthropologists often describe such combinations as mosaics, but the word can sound neater than the evidence feels. In Homo Luzonensis, traits associated with different branches and different depths of human evolution appear together in a collection small enough to fit inside 2 hands. 5 consecutive teeth, catalogued as CCH6A through CCH6E, belonged to one adult and became the holotype of the species. 2 additional teeth, CCH8 and CCH9, represent other individuals. Their dimensions are small, especially the molars, yet their proportions are unusual. The premolars are relatively large compared with the molars behind them, and the molar row decreases in size from front to back. This pattern does not simply duplicate modern humans, Homo erectus, or Homo floresiensis. Size alone would not justify a new species. Teeth can become smaller for many reasons, including body size reduction, diet, developmental change, and population variation. What made the Callao sample distinctive was the arrangement of details. Some premolars possess multiple roots and complex root structures more often associated with earlier hominins. Certain crown shapes and proportions resemble Asian Homo erectus. Other features fall closer to Homo sapiens. Still others evoke forms known from Australopithecus or Paranthropus. Lineages separated from the Callao fossils by distances of time and geography. That last resemblance created fascination and confusion. It was tempting to imagine an extremely ancient hominin lineage leaving Africa before Homo erectus and surviving unnoticed on Luzon. The finger and toe bones seem to strengthen this picture because some are curved and preserve muscle attachment patterns resembling those of much earlier climbing-adapted hominins. Yet resemblance is not ancestry. Similar structures can be retained from a common ancestor, but they can also evolve independently or reappear when similar mechanical demands act on different bodies. This is the problem of homoplasy. Evolution does not always produce a clean sequence in which each later population steadily loses older features. Traits may reverse, converge, or emerge through different developmental routes. A curved phalanx in an island hominin does not automatically mean direct descent from an australopith that somehow crossed half the world. It may indicate that a descendant of a more familiar Asian Homo population developed similar functional anatomy under the pressures of forest movement, climbing, small body size, or altered proportions. The postcranial fossils are too few to choose confidently among these possibilities. 2 finger bones and several foot or toe elements preserve intriguing curvature and robust flexor muscle attachments. These characteristics may suggest regular climbing or frequent use of steep, uneven, and vertically complex terrain. Luzon's forests, limestone slopes, and broken ground could reward such movement, but no shoulder, arm, pelvis, complete leg, or intact foot has been found. The evidence cannot show how often these individuals climbed, whether they moved efficiently in trees, or how their gait differed from that of other humans. It is therefore inaccurate to describe Homo Luzonensis as tree-dwelling. The surviving bones suggest locomotor capabilities, not a complete lifestyle. Modern humans can also develop strong muscle attachments through activity, and skeletal form reflects both inheritance and use. Without the rest of the limb, a single curved bone cannot reveal the balance between walking, climbing, squatting, carrying, and other daily actions. What survives in the record suggests adaptability, but not a return to an ape-like existence. The femoral fragment contributes little certainty. It comes from an immature individual and consists only of part of the shaft. There is no complete long bone from which stature can be calculated reliably. The small size of the teeth and limb elements supports the possibility of a relatively small-bodied hominin, but popular estimates placing the species below roughly 1.2 meters should not be treated as measurements. No one can presently say how tall Homo luzonensis stood, how heavy the adults were, or whether males and females differed greatly in size. The absence of a skull is even more limiting. There is no direct evidence for brain volume, facial shape, brow ridges, forehead, jaw projection, or the contours of the back of the head. Artistic reconstructions must borrow from other species and then fill the gaps with informed imagination. A small body does not automatically imply a brain proportion like that of Homo floresiensis. Homo luzonensis may have had a small brain, a moderate one, or a pattern unlike any currently known island hominin. The fossils are silent. Internal dental anatomy has added another layer. A micro-CT study published in 2022 examined structures beneath the enamel, including the enamel-dentin junction, where developmental shape is often preserved more clearly than on worn crowns. Some premolars and the first molar fell near the variation seen in Asian Homo erectus. The second molar, however, showed features closer to Homo sapiens. The comparison also demonstrated that Homo luzonensis and Homo floresiensis, despite both possessing small teeth, are not dental copies of one another. This matters because media shorthand often turns Luzon into a second Flores. Both islands preserve small-bodied hominins with unusual mixtures of archaic and derived traits. Both required sea crossings. Both lineages survived surprisingly late. Yet Homo floresiensis is known from a skull and much more of the skeleton, while Homo luzonensis remains mostly dental and postcranial fragments. Their differences are substantial enough that one cannot be used as a ready-made portrait of the other. A phylogenetic study published in 2026 attempted to place Homo luzonensis more precisely by analyzing dental and postcranial traits. The resulting trees did not all agree. the limb bones continued to pull the species toward deeper, more archaic-looking positions, while the teeth supported a closer relationship with Homo erectus. Models placing the Luzon lineage beside or near Asian Homo erectus showed relatively strong consistency, leading the authors to favor an erectus-derived population transformed by island evolution. That conclusion remains a hypothesis, not a genetic proof. No ancient DNA or confirmed protein sequence has been recovered from the Callao fossils. Tropical conditions make such preservation unlikely, and morphology can mislead when different lineages converge on similar forms. Scholars still debate whether the primitive-looking features are retained from an earlier ancestor, re-evolved under island conditions, or partly exaggerated by the small sample. The mosaic therefore does not reveal a creature assembled from separate eras. It reveals the limits of expecting evolution to move in a straight line. Homo Luzonensis may have descended from an Asian population that already looked broadly like Homo erectus, then changed under isolation until its teeth, hands, and feet no longer fit any familiar template. In those 13 fossils, ancient and recent signals overlap, not because time became confused inside the cave, but because evolution on an island followed a path no continental sequence had prepared us to recognize. Naming a new human species from 13 fossils is not a moment in which one decisive feature settles the question. It is an argument built from comparison, probability, and the uncomfortable fact that variation within extinct populations is poorly known. When Homo Luzonensis was proposed in 2019, the name rested most heavily on 7 teeth and a small set of hand and foot bones. None of those elements alone was unprecedented. Their significance came from the way their traits appeared together, and from the difficulty of fitting that combination inside any species already recognized. The 5 teeth of the CCH6 individual form the reference specimen. Because they belong to one mouth, they allowed researchers to compare relative size and structure across part of a tooth row rather than treating every tooth as an isolated object. The premolars were strikingly complex. Some had multiple roots and divisions more often associated with earlier members of the human family. Behind them, the molars were small and decreased in size toward the rear. That reduction resembles trends seen in later Homo, but the proportions were unusual. The front teeth of the sequence seemed large relative to the back teeth, creating a pattern not comfortably matched by modern humans or the available samples of Asian Homo erectus. The 2 additional teeth strengthened the impression that the CCH6 anatomy was not simply an individual abnormality. CCH8 and CCH9 came from separate individuals, indicating that at least some unusual dental characteristics occurred within a broader Callao population. Yet the total sample remains tiny. 7 teeth cannot reveal the full range of variation across sexes, ages, families, or thousands of years. CCH9 may also be much older than several other fossils. If the reported age near 134,000 years is sustained, that raises the possibility that the dental sample does not represent one short-lived community, but populations separated by long intervals. Taxonomy becomes especially difficult when fossils are scattered through time. A species name suggests unity, but nature does not divide populations according to museum labels. If related hominins occupied Luzon for tens of thousands of years, their anatomy may have changed. New migrants may have arrived. Small isolated groups may have diverged and later disappeared. The Callao fossils are assigned to Homo Luzonensis because their preserved traits are sufficiently similar and distinctive, not because science can prove that every individual belonged to one continuous biological population. The hand and foot bones complicated the diagnosis. Several phalanges are curved and carry pronounced attachment areas for flexor muscles. In broad form, they resemble bones found in much earlier hominins that retained substantial climbing abilities. But the comparison cannot be read literally. A toe bone does not contain a family tree. Its shape reflects inherited development, body size, mechanical loading, and behavior. The same functional demand can produce similar anatomy in lineages that are not closely related. This is one reason the phrase primitive trait can mislead. Primitive does not mean crude, inferior, or unchanged. It refers to a condition resembling that of an earlier common ancestor. A trait may survive for a long time because it remains useful. It may also reappear through evolutionary reversal, or evolve independently through convergence. The 2026 phylogenetic analysis emphasized this problem. Dental characters tended to place the species near Homo erectus, while the postcranial elements pulled toward more archaic positions. The authors interpreted the conflict as consistent with Homoplasian island adaptation, rather than proof of an Australopith lineage surviving into the late Pleistocene. That interpretation weakens one of the most dramatic popular scenarios. Homo Luzonensis is not securely established as the descendant of an unknown pre-erectus population that left Africa at an extraordinarily early date. Such a dispersal is not impossible, but no fossil trail supports it across Asia. A more economical explanation begins with a population related to Asian Homo erectus, reaching Luzon and evolving there under isolation. The unusual hand and foot anatomy could then reflect changes in locomotion, scaling, or development, rather than direct inheritance from Australopithecus. Even this preferred model remains provisional. Phylogenetic trees built from morphology depend on which traits are coded, how they are weighted, and how missing data are handled. Homo Luzonensis lacks most of the skeleton. A skull could alter its position. So could a complete foot, a pelvis, or additional teeth from securely dated layers. Morphological analyses estimate relationships. They do not reveal them with the precision that a well-preserved genome sometimes can. At Callao, no such genome exists. The tropical environment has so far prevented ancient DNA from resolving the dispute. Heat and moisture accelerate molecular decay, leaving mineralized shape as the primary source of evidence. Without genetic data, researchers cannot test directly whether Homo Luzonensis was closest to Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Denisovans, or another Asian population not yet represented by a named fossil species. They also cannot determine whether the Callao lineage contributed ancestry to later humans in the Philippines. This absence is important because modern populations in the Philippines preserve Denisovan ancestry. That discovery concerns DNA in living people and does not identify the fossils from Callao. It cannot be used to rename Homo Luzonensis as Denisovan, nor to claim that Denisovan ancestry in present-day communities came from this species. The two stories occupy the same broad region but are separated by missing evidence. Species naming in paleoanthropology is always partly a decision about useful boundaries. Some researchers prefer to recognize more species when distinctive populations appear, especially under long geographic isolation. Others emphasize variation within broad, widespread species. Homo erectus itself contains differences across Africa and Asia, and scholars disagree over how many species that diversity represents. Against that background, naming Homo Luzonensis was not the end of debate. It was a way to mark a pattern that existing names did not adequately describe. The strongest case remains the total anatomical package. Very small molars, relatively large and complex premolars, internal dental features with mixed affinities, curved phalanges, and a geographic setting favouring prolonged isolation form a coherent scientific problem. The name allows that problem to be studied without pretending it has been solved. It identifies a population whose preserved anatomy is real, even though its ancestry and boundaries remain uncertain. That distinction matters. Homo Luzonensis is not merely a nickname for mysterious bones, but neither is it a complete portrait of a stable species observed across its full history. It is a hypothesis anchored to fossils. Each new discovery may reinforce it, reshape it, or reveal that the Callao sample contains more complexity than one name can hold. For now, the teeth and toes stand together as evidence that Luzon produced a human form unlike any other yet known. While taxonomy does what it often must in deep prehistory, draw a careful line through a landscape where most of the evidence has vanished. A face is usually where an extinct human becomes imaginable. Museums build reconstructions around skulls because a skull offers proportions that the eye understands immediately. Homo Luzonensis denies us that comfort. No fragment of face, brain case, or complete jaw has been securely attributed to the species. The 13 fossils from Callao provide teeth, finger bones, foot elements, and part of a thigh shaft, but nothing from which a reliable head can be assembled. Every face shown in an illustration is therefore an artistic proposal, not a recovered likeness. This absence is more than a missing detail. The skull carries many traits paleoanthropologists use to compare human species' cranial capacity: brow ridge form, facial projection, cheekbone orientation, jaw shape, and the architecture of the skull base. Without those structures, Homo Luzonensis cannot be placed confidently by one of the richest anatomical datasets available for other hominins. Researchers cannot say whether its forehead sloped like that of Homo erectus, whether its face was small beneath the brain case, or whether it possessed a combination unknown elsewhere. The evidence remains incomplete at the most recognizable part of the body. Brain size is therefore completely unknown. Small teeth and small postcranial elements do not permit a calculation of cranial volume. Body size and brain size can evolve at different rates, especially under island conditions. Homo floresiensis had a small body and a small brain, but it does not follow that Luzon's hominin shared the same proportions. Treating one island species as a model for the other risks replacing evidence with analogy. Until a skull or internal cranial fragment is found, any number assigned to the brain of Homo Luzonensis is speculation. The same restraint applies to stature. Several surviving bones are small and the teeth are generally diminutive, so a relatively small-bodied hominin is a reasonable inference, but there is no complete femur, tibia, humerus, pelvis, or articulated skeleton. The only femoral specimen is a partial shaft from an immature individual. Standard estimates of height rely on relationships between complete long bone dimensions and stature, relationships that can differ across populations with unusual proportions. Popular descriptions sometimes place Homo Luzonensis below about 1.2 meters, yet no complete skeleton supports such precision. What survives suggests smallness, not an exact measurement. Even the word small requires care. Teeth can reduce independently of overall body size. An individual may possess small molars without being exceptionally short. The Callao sample also represents at least 3 people, not one body, a tooth from one adult, a toe bone from another, and a femoral fragment from an immature individual cannot simply be combined into a composite skeleton, as though all proportions belong together. Artistic reconstructions often do this because an image demands completeness. Science must resist the same pressure. Body mass is equally uncertain. No pelvis preserves the breadth of the trunk, and no joint surfaces establish the scale of the hips, knees, or shoulders. Researchers do not know whether Homo luzonensis was lightly built, stocky, long-limbed, short-limbed, or variable across individuals. Island evolution can change proportions in complicated ways. Reduced body mass may lower energy requirements, but forest movement, climbing, walking, and heat regulation can favor different solutions. No single explanation fully accounts for the possible anatomy, because most of that anatomy is missing. The hand and foot bones provide hints, but hints can mislead when enlarged into a full silhouette. Their curvature and flexor attachment areas suggest that climbing or frequent movement on steep, irregular surfaces may have mattered, yet no complete hand reveals finger length, thumb proportions, or grip mechanics. No full foot shows the arch, heel, or arrangement of the toes. The species almost certainly walked upright, but its precise gait cannot be reconstructed. It may have climbed more often than many recent humans without spending most of their life in trees. Soft tissue is entirely beyond reach. Skin color, hair distribution, nose shape, ear form, eye appearance, and facial expression leave no direct trace in the Callao material. Climate can guide broad expectations, but not a portrait. A tropical island population may have possessed pigmentation suited to intense ultraviolet exposure. Yet ancestry and genetic history also matter. Even among living humans, visible traits vary widely within similar environments. Giving Homo luzonensis one definitive appearance creates certainty where none exists. Age and sex add further uncertainty. The fossils represent at least 2 adults and 1 immature individual, but most cannot be sexed confidently. Dental wear and development can provide age information, though they do not produce a complete life history. A synchrotron-based preprint studying growth lines in the tooth cement of CCH6 proposed an age at death of roughly 31 to 38 years. That estimate concerns biological age, not the archaeological date of the fossil, and it has not yet become a final peer-reviewed conclusion. Even if accurate, it tells us how long one adult lived, not what that person looked like. The same study suggested that dental development in CCH6 was not dramatically outside the range expected for Homo. The species may appear anatomically unusual without having followed an entirely alien pattern of growth, yet a tooth records only part of development. Childhood duration, maturation, social dependency, and lifespan cannot be reconstructed from one individual's cement lines. The temptation to turn a technical result into a biography must be held in check. Reconstruction artists face an impossible assignment. To make Homo luzonensis visible, they must borrow. A skull may be adapted from Homo erectus, facial softness from Homo sapiens, body size from Homo floresiensis, and hands or feet from earlier hominins. The finished figure can look persuasive because the gaps are hidden. Viewers may remember the image as evidence, even though most of it was invented. Responsible reconstructions should reveal uncertainty rather than conceal it, presenting more than one plausible form or marking which features are unknown. This lack of a face does not make the species less real. Teeth preserve lineage, phalanges preserve movement, mineral chemistry preserves time. The absence of a skull simply changes the nature of the mystery. Homo luzonensis is known through structures often overlooked in a complete skeleton, forcing attention toward roots, joints, curves, and proportions beneath enamel. The species survives not as a gaze from the past, but as a pattern. Perhaps a skull lies somewhere in the cave system or beneath sediments elsewhere in northern Luzon. Perhaps tropical decay removed it long ago. Until one appears, the most honest portrait is unfinished, a small-bodied possibility without measured height, an upright walker with uncertain climbing abilities, a human relative whose brain and face remain outside the record. The empty space above the known teeth is not an invitation to fill it carelessly. It is evidence, reminding us how little material can establish that a lineage existed, and how much of a life can disappear even after its bones endure. To imagine daily life for Homo Luzonensis, the first discipline is restraint. Archaeology offers no village, no hearth securely tied to the fossils, no basket, no wooden tool, no food remains that can be assigned confidently to the species. Callao Cave preserves bones, but a cave containing bones is not automatically a home. The individuals may have entered alive, been carried in after death, visited briefly, or become part of the deposit through processes no longer visible. Every scene of daily life must therefore begin as an inference from landscape, anatomy, and the requirements shared by all hominins. Northern Luzon offered abundance but not ease. Tropical forests hold enormous biological variety, yet edible resources are dispersed across seasons and elevations. Fruit can ripen for only a short period. Nuts may require pounding. Underground storage organs are hidden beneath soil. Small animals move quickly through dense cover, while larger prey can be difficult to track where visibility is limited. Rivers provide fish, shellfish, fresh water, and travel corridors, but they also flood with little warning. A successful population would need intimate knowledge of timing, which slope produced fruit after the rains, where water remained during dry weeks, and how storms altered familiar routes. The teeth of Homo Luzonensis do not reveal a menu. Their small molars and unusual premolars preserve taxonomic information, but they do not prove meat-eating, plant specialization, cooking, or reliance on any particular food. Microscopic wear, isotopes, and residues might eventually narrow the possibilities, yet current evidence is insufficient. The safest reconstruction is one of flexibility. Island hominins likely used whatever foods could be obtained reliably, shifting among plant resources, small animals, aquatic foods, insects, eggs, and occasional larger carcasses when opportunity allowed. This is plausible ecology, not a recovered meal plan. Stone tools would have expanded those possibilities, but no distinctive Homo Luzonensis industry has been identified. Callao Cave contains lithic material from several periods, and a 2021 technological study clarified aspects of stoneworking at the site. Still, proximity inside one cave does not establish authorship. A tool must be securely related in space, age, and depositional history to the fossils before it can be treated as their product. For now, it is reasonable to suppose that the lineage possessed some capacity for tool use, because stone technology was widespread among earlier Homo, but the form and complexity of that technology remain unknown. Organic tools may have been more important than the surviving record suggests. Bamboo, wood, bark, fiber, and leaves are plentiful in tropical settings and can be shaped into digging sticks, containers, cutting edges, bindings, shelters, or floating supports. Almost none would survive tens of thousands of years in humid sediment. Bamboo can produce a sharp edge when split, and wooden implements can perform tasks that leave little archaeological signature. Yet possibility is not proof. The vanished organic record explains why absence of stone does not equal absence of technology. but it cannot tell us which objects Homo Luzonensis actually made. Mobility through the island would have required choices shaped by terrain. The Cagayan Valley offered relatively open corridors compared with mountain forests, while rivers connected lowlands to limestone uplands. Seasonal movement may have followed food, water, or animal migrations. Small groups could have returned to familiar caves or overhang without occupying them permanently. The curved finger and toe bones may fit a population comfortable on steep slopes, among trees, or across broken karst. But they do not establish a life in the canopy. Movement was probably varied because Luzon itself was varied. Shelter may have been simple and temporary. Caves provide protection from rain and wind, but they can be damp, dark, unstable, or already occupied by animals. Forest materials allow lean-tos and windbreaks that leave no trace. People may have slept beneath rock overhangs, near river terraces, or on elevated ground above flood zones. Fire would have offered warmth, light, protection, and food processing, yet no fire use has been securely linked to Homo Luzonensis. It should not be inserted into every imagined camp merely because later humans depended upon it. Social cooperation is easier to infer in broad terms. A population surviving on an isolated island could not consist of solitary individuals meeting only by chance. Reproduction, food sharing, protection, learning, and movement would have just depended on relationships within groups. Knowledge of edible plants, dangerous terrain, weather, and water sources must pass between individuals somehow. The exact form of communication is unknown. No throat anatomy, brain case, or symbolic object reveals language ability. Still, coordinated life does not require modern speech in its full form, and even simple social learning can preserve essential knowledge over generations. The presence of an immature individual in the fossil sample reminds us that this was not merely a population of wandering adults. The femoral fragment indicates that younger members were part of the Callao lineage, though nothing about that individual's death or treatment should be invented. In any viable hominin society, immature members would require care, protection, and opportunities to learn. Their survival would connect daily routines to long-term continuity, making food sharing and collective movement more than optional advantages. Population size may have remained small. Islands restrict territory and resources, and founder effects can produce low genetic diversity. Small populations are vulnerable to storms, disease, reproductive imbalance, and sudden habitat change. They are also difficult for archaeology to detect. A few mobile groups spread across northern Luzon could leave almost no durable trace, especially if they relied heavily on organic materials and reused locations briefly. What looks like cultural absence may partly reflect demography and preservation. The island environment may also have shaped the body over long periods. Reduced size could lower energy requirements, while climbing-related traits might aid movement through forests and limestone terrain. The 2026 analysis favors an origin near Asian Homo erectus, followed by substantial island evolution. But this remains a model rather than an observed sequence. No chain of fossils shows a larger ancestor gradually becoming the Callao form. Adaptation is inferred from the endpoint, and the route between them is missing. Even silence in the cave may reflect preservation rather than the true limits of behavior. Daily life, then, cannot be reconstructed as a sequence of confident scenes. It appears instead as a set of pressures finding scattered food, reading weather, crossing rivers, negotiating steep ground, caring for group members, and maintaining knowledge in a small population. Homo Luzonensis may have lived quietly enough to leave almost nothing recognizable as culture. Yet survival over many generations would itself represent a complex achievement. The mystery is not that the fossils failed to show ordinary life. It is that ordinary life once continued across Luzon for long enough to shape a distinct human lineage, while nearly every gesture, tool, meal, shelter, and path disappeared without record. The stone tools from Luzon create a problem of attribution. They prove that hominins shaped rock on the island, but they do not identify the hands that struck the blows. At Kalinga, the evidence is ancient and dramatic: a rhinoceros skeleton bearing cut marks, percussion damage, and signs that flesh and marrow were removed with stone implements around 709,000 years ago. At Callao Cave, lithic material appears within a complicated sequence of human activity. Between those sites lies an enormous span of time, and nowhere does a tool carry the name of its maker. Kalinga offers the clearest early scene. Archaeologists recovered much of an extinct rhinoceros skeleton alongside 57 stone artifacts, including cores, flakes, and hammerstones. The bones preserve cut marks where muscle was separated, impact scars where heavier blows broke them, and damage consistent with marrow extraction. The conclusion is secure in its narrow form. Unidentified hominins used stone tools to process the carcass. Anything beyond that becomes less certain. The word hunted is especially tempting. A rhinoceros suggests danger, planning, and coordinated pursuit, all of which make compelling narration. But the site does not reveal how the animal died. It may have been killed by hominins, scavenged after natural death, found injured, or exploited when trapped in mud. Taphonomy records what happened to the carcass after access began, not necessarily the event that ended the animal's life. The most accurate image is therefore not a hunting party closing around prey, but a group making systematic use of a large body they had obtained somehow. The tool technology is relatively simple, though simple does not mean ineffective. Flakes struck from cores can produce sharp edges capable of cutting hide and flesh. Hammerstones can break bone and detach new flakes. Such tools may be made quickly from local stone and discarded after brief use. Their value lies in practical function rather than visual refinement. A small toolkit can open a carcass, process wood, cut plants, and perform many tasks that leave no direct trace. No hominin fossil was recovered at Kalinga. The makers could have belonged to an early population related to Homo erectus, to ancestors of Homo Luzonensis, or to a separate lineage that vanished long before the Callao individuals lived. The site is hundreds of thousands of years older than the Callao fossils, even when the reported age of approximately 134,000 years for CCH9 is considered. More than 500,000 years remain without a connecting human skeleton. That gap is large enough for migration, isolation, evolutionary change, extinction, and replacement to occur more than once. It is possible that the Kalinga toolmakers founded the population from which Homo Luzonensis evolved. This would fit a broad model in which Asian Homo erectus reached Luzon and changed under island conditions. Yet the possibility should not be mistaken for a demonstrated lineage. No sequence of fossils shows the transformation. The Kalinga hominins could represent an earlier colonization that left no descendants, followed much later by another arrival. Callao Cave presents a different attribution problem. Stone artifacts occur in the deposits, and a detailed technological study published in 2021 examined how some were produced. But the cave contains material from multiple periods, sediments accumulated over long intervals, and objects found within the same cavern may differ greatly in age. Without a clear stratigraphic and chronological association between a tool assemblage and a Homo Luzonensis fossil, authorship remains unresolved. This distinction is easy to lose in popular retellings. A fossil and a tool from one named site can be placed side by side until they appear connected. Archaeologically, the connection must be earned. Researchers ask whether the objects came from the same undisturbed layer, whether that layer has been dated, whether sediment movement could have mixed material, and whether the tool's age overlaps with the fossil. Callao's depositional history makes such questions essential. There is therefore no securely defined Homo Luzonensis industry. No distinctive tool type can be followed across Luzon and assigned to this species. No sequence shows technological change through its history. No workshop, quarry, or repeated activity surface has been linked directly to the Callao population. This does not mean Homo Luzonensis lacked tools. It means the surviving record does not allow a confident label. The broader evolutionary context makes some form of tool use plausible. Hominins in Asia made stone tools long before the Callao fossils, and early technology at Kalinga confirms that tool-making knowledge existed on Luzon. A descendant population could have retained and modified that knowledge. Yet culture does not pass automatically across hundreds of thousands of years. Skills can disappear in small populations. Raw materials can shape technological choices, and organic tools can replace stone for many tasks. Tropical environments may particularly distort the record. Bamboo, wood, rattan, bark, and fibre are abundant and versatile. Split bamboo can create sharp edges. Wood can become digging sticks, spears, wedges, containers, or supports. Fibre can bind structures and carry loads. These materials decay rapidly in warm, wet conditions, leaving archaeology biased toward stone. A population relying heavily on organic technology might appear materially simple even if its daily toolkit was varied. That possibility must also be handled carefully. Organic preservation is poor, but poor preservation cannot serve as proof that a lost bamboo industry existed. It explains why absence is ambiguous. The honest position lies between two extremes. Homo Luzonensis should not be described as technologically advanced without evidence, but neither should a sparse stone record be treated as evidence of intellectual limitation. Tools also intersect with the question of sea crossing. Because Luzon required movement over water, it is tempting to infer raft construction. Woodworking tools may have been used, and plant fibers may have provided bindings, but none has survived. Geography proves the crossing, not the vehicle. The same caution applies to fire, hunting weapons, food processing, and shelter construction. Each is possible. None is securely associated with the fossils. What the tools reveal is that Luzon hosted more than one episode of hominin activity across deep time. At Kalinga, stone edges opened a rhinoceros carcass in the Middle Pleistocene. At Callao, later artifacts record repeated human use of a limestone landscape. Whether one lineage connects these moments remains unknown. The stones preserve action without identity, while the fossils preserve identity without a definite technology. That separation is central to the mystery. Archaeology often reconstructs lives by joining bodies to objects. But on Luzon the join is missing. A tooth can establish a species, and a cut mark can establish behavior, yet neither can tell us whether they belong to the same people. Until a securely associated tool assemblage is found beside Homo Luzonensis remains, their material world must remain open, perhaps simple, perhaps largely organic, perhaps inherited from ancient island settlers, and perhaps unlike anything the surviving stones allow us to see. Homo Luzonensis did not live at the edge of an empty world. By the time the Callao fossils entered the record, island Southeast Asia had become one of the most complicated regions in human evolution. To the west, Homo erectus had persisted on Java for an extraordinary span. Farther south, Homo floresiensis survived on Flores, somewhere across Asia. Denisovan populations left genetic and protein traces but almost no recognizable skeletons. Homo sapiens eventually moved through the same broad region, while Neanderthals occupied territories much farther west and north, yet remained connected to this story through shared ancestry and interbreeding. The old picture of one human species replacing another in a simple sequence no longer fits. Homo erectus provides the most important comparison, because the newest phylogenetic work places Homo luzonensis near Asian erectus more consistently than near any other named lineage. Erectus populations reached Eastern Asia early, developed regional variation, and survived on Java until surprisingly late. Their anatomy was not uniform. Skulls, teeth, and body proportions differed across time and geography, making Homo erectus less a single fixed form than a broad and changing population complex. If a branch of that complex reached Luzon, island isolation could have carried it along a very different evolutionary path. The dental evidence supports this possibility without proving it. Internal structures in several Callao teeth fall near the range of Asian Homo erectus, while other teeth resemble Homo sapiens more closely. The postcranial bones complicate the picture by preserving traits that look much older. A 2026 analysis interpreted this conflict as compatible with island evolution, developmental reversal, or homoplasy. In that model, Homo luzonensis is not a surviving Australopith but an Asian Homo descendant reshaped so strongly that parts of its skeleton imitate deeper ancestry. Flores offers the nearest geographical and evolutionary parallel. Homo floresiensis was also isolated on an island that required a sea crossing. It was small-bodied, retained a surprising mixture of archaic and derived features, and survived into the late Pleistocene. These similarities encourage comparison, but they do not establish close kinship. Flores preserves a skull, jaws, and substantial portions of the skeleton, while Luzon offers no face or brain case. Their teeth also differ in important ways. Both lineages may illustrate how islands can produce unusual human forms without representing the same branch. The phrase hobbit of Luzon therefore obscures more than it clarifies. Homo floresiensis supplies a useful model for island adaptation, not a template for reconstructing Homo luzonensis. The Luzon species may have differed in stature, brain size, facial form, locomotion, and ancestry. Even their small dental dimensions arose through patterns that were not identical. Scholars still debate whether the two populations descended independently from different Homo erectus groups, shared a deeper ancestor, or represent separate dispersals whose similarities evolved under comparable conditions. Denisovans add another kind of uncertainty. They were first identified not through a complete skeleton, but through DNA from fragmentary remains in Callao Cave. Additional evidence, including a jaw from the Tibetan Plateau and genetic ancestry in living populations, shows that Denisovan-related groups ranged widely across Asia. Their geographic reach may have extended into Southeast Asia, but no Denisovan fossil has been securely identified in the Philippines. No DNA or protein recovered from Callao currently links Homo luzonensis to them. This distinction is essential because some present-day Philippine populations carry substantial Denisovan ancestry. The Aita Magbucon have been reported to possess especially high levels, but that ancestry belongs to modern human genomes. It does not come from DNA extracted from Homo Luzonensis. The genetic signal proves that ancestors of living people mixed with a Denisovan-related population somewhere in the past. It does not reveal that the population lived at Callao, looked like the Callao fossils, or belonged to the same species. Neanderthals were geographically more distant, concentrated mainly across Europe and Western Eurasia. Yet they remain part of the wider family network. Genetic evidence shows that Neanderthals and Denisovans were sister populations that also exchanged genes with each other and with Homo sapiens. A first-generation individual from Denisova Cave even had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Such findings demonstrate that named groups were not always reproductively sealed. Population boundaries shifted, and contact could produce descendants even between deeply separated lineages. That lesson matters for Luzon, but it cannot be converted into a claim of interbreeding. Homo Luzonensis may have overlapped in time with Homo sapiens, especially if some Callao fossils are around 50,000 to 67,000 years old. Yet no hybrid skeleton, ancient genome, shared occupation layer, or securely linked transitional technology demonstrates contact. Their worlds may have crossed, remained separate, or overlapped only briefly. Chronological proximity is not evidence of a meeting. Homo sapiens was spreading through Southeast Asia during the later part of the Callao sequence, moving through coastlines, river systems, and islands that had already been occupied by other hominins for immense periods. Modern humans did not enter a blank landscape. They encountered ecological systems shaped by earlier populations, and perhaps, in some regions, the populations themselves. On Luzon, however, archaeology has not captured such an encounter. The absence may reflect preservation, small population size, incomplete excavation, or genuine separation. Other East Asian fossils make the network even harder to simplify. Several specimens from China preserve mixtures of archaic and recent traits, and do not fit comfortably into a single named species. Some may relate to Denisovans, others to regional Homo erectus populations, and some may represent groups still unnamed. Protein and DNA studies occasionally clarify these relationships, but much of the record remains morphological and fragmentary. Homo Luzonensis belongs inside this broader uncertainty rather than outside it as an isolated curiosity. The emerging picture is not a ladder leading neatly toward modern humans. It is a branching, reconnecting web of populations moving across mainland and island environments. Some became isolated for tens of thousands of years. Some exchanged genes. Some evolved small bodies or unusual anatomical combinations. Others disappeared without leaving recoverable descendants. Sea crossings did not end connection entirely, but they could reduce it enough for evolution to take unfamiliar directions. The surviving fossils offer no privilege of certainty. They reveal only one local expression of a continent-wide evolutionary experiment still largely hidden. Within that web, Homo Luzonensis occupies a position defined as much by missing evidence as by known anatomy. Its teeth pull toward Homo erectus, its limb bones preserve archaic-looking signals, its island setting invites comparison with Flores, its region overlaps the broad shadow of Denisovan dispersal, while later Homo sapiens may have approached its final known range. None of these comparisons settles identity. Together they show why Luzon cannot be understood through one lineage alone. The island was part of a crowded human Asia, where different populations dispersed, changed, met occasionally, and often vanished before science learned their names. The question of where Homo Luzonensis came from has never had a single easy answer, because every plausible origin explains one part of the anatomy while leaving another part unresolved. The teeth point most strongly toward Asian Homo erectus. The finger and toe bones appear more archaic. The island setting suggests powerful local evolution, yet the absence of a fossil sequence prevents researchers from watching that evolution unfold. What remains is a set of competing histories, each beginning before the known individuals entered Callao Cave. The oldest dramatic possibility proposes that a very early member of the human family left Africa before Homo erectus became widespread and somehow reached Southeast Asia. Under this model, the curved phalanges and other primitive-looking traits would be inherited directly from an ancient ancestor resembling early Homo or even Australopiths. Luzon would then preserve a lineage that survived in isolation for an astonishing span while related forms disappeared elsewhere. This hypothesis has obvious narrative power, but its evidential problems are severe. No chain of fossils traces an Australopith-like population across southern Asia. The sea crossings required to reach Luzon would have followed an enormous overland dispersal for which the archaeological record offers no secure trail. Similarity in a few hand and foot bones cannot carry the entire argument. Traits that look ancient may be retained, but they may also evolve independently. Without skulls, more complete limbs, or genetic evidence, direct survival from such a deep lineage remains possible only in the broadest sense. A second explanation begins with Homo erectus, the most widely distributed archaic human known from Eastern Asia. Erectus populations had already crossed large continental distances and occupied Java. Their long history, geographic diversity, and variable anatomy make them plausible ancestors for island lineages. A branch could have moved northward or eastward through the archipelagos, crossed into Luzon, and then become isolated from its source population. This is the model favoured by the 2026 phylogenetic study. Dental characters repeatedly placed Homo Luzonensis near Asian Homo erectus, while models linking them showed relatively strong internal consistency. Under this interpretation, the archaic-looking postcranial features are not evidence of an Australopith survivor. They are products of homoplacy, evolutionary reversal, altered developmental pathways, or functional adaptation after isolation. Island evolution supplies the mechanism. A small founding population would carry only part of the genetic variation present in its source group. Limited resources could favour lower energy requirements and reduced body size. Forested and mountainous terrain might reward frequent climbing, strong flexor muscles, and movement across uneven surfaces. Genetic drift could make unusual traits common simply through chance. Over many generations, these forces might transform a population descended from Homo erectus into a form whose teeth remain partly erectus-like, while its hands and feet appear unexpectedly ancient. Yet insular dwarfism, often invoked in this story, is still a hypothesis rather than an observed sequence. The Callao fossils suggest a small hominin, but exact stature is unknown. No earlier skeleton on Luzon shows a larger-bodied ancestor. No series demonstrates gradual reduction through time. The model is biologically reasonable and consistent with other island mammals, but the crucial intermediate fossils have not been found. A third possibility allows several migrations instead of one. The hominins at Kalinga may represent an early colonization around 709,000 years ago. Their descendants could have vanished, leaving Luzon open to later arrivals. Another population, perhaps also related to Homo erectus, might have reached the island hundreds of thousands of years afterward and produced Homo Luzonensis. Alternatively, repeated small migrations could have introduced new individuals into an established population, creating a mixed ancestry that morphology alone cannot disentangle. This multiple dispersal model fits the region's emerging complexity. Flores, Sulawesi, Java, and other islands show that hominins crossed water at different times. There is no reason to assume Luzon was entered only once. Sea barriers reduced movement, but they did not eliminate it. Rare arrivals separated by tens of thousands of years could create alternating periods of isolation and renewed contact. The Callao chronology may support complexity rather than continuity. CCH9 has been reported at approximately 134,000 years old, while CCH1 dates to at least about 66 and 700 years, and other specimens derive from deposits at least around 50,000 years old. These dates do not prove uninterrupted occupation. The older tooth and younger fossils could belong to one lineage persisting across more than 80,000 years. But they could also represent related populations separated by local disappearance or recolonization. The cave records moments, not the spaces between them. A fourth scenario places greater emphasis on population mixing somewhere before or after arrival, across Pleistocene Asia. Human groups were not always reproductively isolated. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens exchanged genes, and other archaic populations may have done the same. A Luzon lineage could therefore descend from an already mixed Asian population. The mosaic anatomy might reflect multiple ancestral sources rather than island adaptation alone. No direct evidence currently supports this for Homo Luzonensis. There is no Callao DNA, no protein sequence confirming kinship, and no diagnostic hybrid skeleton. Modern Denisovan ancestry in Philippine populations cannot fill the gap. It demonstrates ancient admixture involving ancestors of living people, not the identity of the Callao fossils. Mixing remains a general evolutionary possibility, not a specific conclusion. The explanations are not mutually exclusive. A Homo erectus-related population could have reached Luzon, become smaller, developed convergent climbing-related anatomy, received occasional migrants, and changed further through drift. Evolution rarely follows one clean mechanism. Isolation can coexist with contact, and natural selection can operate alongside random demographic effects. The small fossil sample may preserve the result of several processes that researchers separate only for analysis. What would settle the question is clear but difficult to obtain. A skull could reveal affinities hidden from teeth. A complete foot might show whether the curved phalanges belong to a distinctive locomotor system. Older hominin fossils from Luzon could connect Kalinga to Callao or demonstrate replacement. Recoverable proteins or DNA could transform the debate, though tropical preservation makes that hope uncertain. Even the preferred hypothesis depends heavily on missing anatomy. A different tooth row, an unexpected skull, or an older limb could shift the trees again, reminding researchers that classification here remains provisional rather than final. For now, the most economical model begins with Asian Homo erectus and ends with prolonged evolution in an island environment. It explains the strongest dental signal and requires no undocumented Australopith migration across Asia. But economy is not certainty. The postcranial evidence continues to resist a simple placement, and the chronological gaps remain immense. Homo Luzonensis may be an island descendant of erectus, yet the route from ancestor to species is still invisible, hidden somewhere between a butchered rhinoceros, a tooth more than 100,000 years old, and a cave that preserves only the final fragments of the transformation. The route remains invisible partly because Luzon is a difficult place to preserve paleoanthropological evidence. Heat accelerates chemical reactions, humidity keeps bone damp, acidic soils dissolve mineral structure, roots penetrate deposits, Microorganisms break down organic material, and moving water carries fragments away from their original positions. In colder or drier regions, a skeleton may survive with enough collagen for dating or DNA analysis. In the tropics, even dense bone can become porous, cracked, and chemically altered before anyone finds it. Caves improve the odds, but they do not create perfect archives. Callao Cave shelters material from direct weather, yet water still moves through limestone. Minerals precipitate and dissolve. Sediments enter through openings, shift across chambers, and harden into layers whose histories may be deceptive. Animals disturb surfaces. Burrowing organisms mix small objects. A bone can move through a crack or arrive in sediment washed from another part of the cave. Archaeologists must reconstruct not only what was deposited, but how every layer changed afterward. This makes excavation exceptionally slow. A fragment only a few centimeters long may be the sole surviving part of an individual, and removing it carelessly can destroy its context. Sediment must be mapped, screened, sampled, and compared across tiny differences in depth and composition. The discovery of CCH1 shows how easily important material can hide in plain sight. It was recovered during excavation but recognized as hominin only later, while faunal remains were being examined. Other fragments may sit mislabeled in collections or remain in unstudied sediment. The known sample is therefore shaped by chance at every stage. An individual first had to die or lose a tooth where preservation was possible. The remains had to escape scavenging, weathering, dissolution, and geological disturbance. They then had to survive excavation, be noticed among thousands of animal fragments, and preserve enough anatomy to be identified. 13 fossils do not describe the true abundance of Homo Luzonensis. They describe the narrow sequence of accidents required for any trace to reach the present. Dating adds another layer of difficulty. Different methods measure different events, and tropical cave environments can disturb the chemical systems on which those methods depend. CCH1 produced a uranium series minimum age near 700 years, but a minimum age does not mean the bone died at that exact moment. CCH6 and CCH8 came from deposits considered at least around 50,000 years old. CCH9 later received a reported age near 134,000 years. These results may reflect several periods of presence, but they cannot be treated as one unified date for the entire assemblage. The CCH9 result widens the species' possible history while increasing uncertainty. If the tooth truly belongs near 134,000 years ago, the Callao lineage may have occupied Luzon far earlier than familiar late Pleistocene dates suggest. But one directly dated specimen does not establish continuous occupation across the intervening millennia. The cave may preserve separate visits, separated populations, or fossils move through complex depositional processes. A new age can deepen a story without making it simpler. Ancient DNA would normally offer a way through some of these problems. A genome could test whether Homo Luzonensis was closest to Asian Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Denisovans, or an unknown branch. It could reveal population size, isolation, interbreeding, and whether individuals from different dates belong to one lineage. Yet no confirmed ancient DNA has been recovered from the Callao fossils. Tropical heat and moisture break DNA into fragments until too little remains to distinguish from contamination. This absence is not unusual in Southeast Asia. Genetic preservation declines rapidly in warm environments over tens of thousands of years. Excavation and handling also introduce modern human DNA, making weak signals difficult to trust. Methods continue to improve, and fragments once considered useless may eventually yield molecular information. For now, however, morphology carries almost the entire burden of classification. Ancient proteins sometimes survive where DNA does not, and they have identified relationships in others difficult fossils. Tooth enamel can preserve proteins for long periods because it is dense and mineralized. A successful paleoproteomic study might clarify whether the Callao teeth align more closely with one branch of Homo than another. No confirmed protein result has yet resolved Homo Luzonensis, and the number of available specimens creates an ethical problem. Destructive sampling may consume part of a collection that is already extraordinarily small. The same scarcity limits traditional anatomy. With only 7 teeth and a few postcranial bones, researchers cannot measure normal variation within the population. A strange root may be typical of the species or unusual in one family. A curved phalanx may reflect inherited anatomy, habitual activity, developmental stress, or some combination. At least 3 individuals are represented, but they may be separated by tens of thousands of years. Statistical comparisons become fragile when nearly every specimen is unique. Missing body regions magnify that fragility. A skull could overturn current assumptions about ancestry. A pelvis could reveal body proportions and locomotion. A complete femur could support a reliable stature estimate. A jaw could show how the teeth were arranged and how the face functioned. Until those elements appear, every reconstruction remains weighted toward the parts that happen to survive. The species may look dental in scientific discussions simply because teeth preserve better than most bones. Callao is also only one point on a large island. Homo Luzonensis almost certainly ranged beyond the chamber where its fossils were found. But tropical vegetation, deep sediment, erosion, and modern land use conceal possible sites. Coastal occupations from periods of lower sea level may now lie underwater. River valleys may have buried ancient surfaces beneath meters of alluvium. Mountain caves remain unexplored or difficult to access. The known distribution of the species may reflect the distribution of research rather than the distribution of the population. This imbalance warns against turning absence into behavior. No secure hearth does not prove they lacked fire. No linked tool tradition does not prove they lacked technology. No butchery site tied to their bones does not prove they avoided meat. Yet the reverse is equally important. Missing evidence cannot be filled with whatever behavior seems plausible. Archaeology must leave some spaces blank. The result is a species that is scientifically real but narratively incomplete. Its name rests on measurable anatomy. Its island presence is undeniable. Its broader life remains hidden behind preservation bias, dating complexity, missing molecules, and the small number of excavated sites. Each limit is frustrating, but each is also part of the evidence. Homo Luzonensis appears fragmentary not because its existence was insignificant, but because tropical deep time is exceptionally efficient at erasing the ordinary traces of a population. The surviving teeth and bones are not a poor version of a complete story. They are the rare pieces that escaped a system designed by climate, geology, and chance to leave almost nothing behind. The disappearance of Homo Luzonensis cannot be placed on a single date because the fossil record does not preserve a final population. The youngest Callao remains are usually discussed within a range beginning at least around 50,000 years ago, but none has been demonstrated to represent the last individual of the species. A fossil marks presence at one moment, not absence after it. Beyond that point, the record falls silent, and silence can mean extinction, migration, absorption into another population, or simply that later remains have not yet been found. This distinction matters because extinction stories often become cleaner than the evidence allows. A species seems to appear, occupy a landscape, confront a rival, and vanish. Luzon offers no such sequence. There is no terminal layer filled with bodies, no abrupt change in tools securely tied to the Callao population, and no environmental catastrophe precisely aligned with its disappearance. Even the span of occupation is uncertain. If CCH9 truly dates to roughly 134,000 years ago, Homo Luzonensis, or a closely related Callao population, may have persisted for many tens of thousands of years, yet continuity between the older tooth and younger fossils remains unproven. Small population size is one plausible vulnerability. An island lineage founded by few individuals may carry limited genetic diversity, and later groups could remain scattered across restricted habitats. In such populations, chance becomes powerful. A run of poor seasons, an imbalance in surviving adults, disease, or the loss of essential knowledge can have effects that a larger population would absorb. None of these pressures needs to be spectacular. Extinction may occur through gradual demographic failure, with fewer groups returning each generation until no recoverable trace remains. Luzon's environment could intensify that fragility. Typhoons periodically destroy vegetation, alter rivers, and reduce food supplies. Volcanic eruptions can bury habitats beneath ash, while earthquakes and landslides reshape valleys and cave systems. Longer climatic shifts change rainfall, forest cover, and the distribution of animals and plants. A population adapted to particular elevations or seasonal resources might survive repeated disturbances for millennia, then face a combination beyond its ability to recover. Still, no identified event can presently be named as the cause. The island's isolation, which had once enabled distinctive evolution, could then become a trap, limiting escape and preventing rapid reinforcement from neighbouring populations. Ecological change may also have reduced the animals and plants on which the lineage depended, though its diet is too poorly known to trace such a decline directly. Island ecosystems often contain specialised species living within narrow ranges. When one part of the network changes, consequences spread outward. Large mammals disappeared from Luzon at different times, and habitat mosaic shifted. Homo Luzonensis may have been flexible, but flexibility has limits when territory is finite and neighbouring refuges lie across deep water. The arrival of Homo sapiens offers another possibility, but it is also the source of the greatest temptation to overstate the case. Modern humans were dispersing through Southeast Asia during the later part of the period represented at Callao. Their technology, social networks, or ecological range may have differed from those of the island lineage. Competition for food, shelter, stone, or strategic landscapes could have placed pressure on a small resident population. Yet no archaeological layer at Callao demonstrates direct coexistence, and no site records conflict between the groups. There is likewise no evidence that Homo sapiens deliberately eliminated Homo Luzonensis. Such a claim would require far more than overlapping dates. Population replacement can occur without violence through differences in fertility, mobility, disease resistance, or access to wider exchange networks. It can also occur when one group expands into habitats abandoned by another. The worlds of the two lineages may have overlapped briefly, or they may have missed each other entirely. Scholars still debate the timing of modern human presence in different parts of the Philippines, and the chronology is not precise enough to stage a documented encounter. Absorption through interbreeding is possible in principle. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens exchanged genes despite long periods of separation. If Homo Luzonensis met incoming modern humans, descendants might have carried some of its ancestry forward even as the distinct population disappeared. But no DNA from Callao tests this possibility, and no genetic signal in living Filipinos has been identified specifically as Homo Luzonensis ancestry. Denisovan ancestry in present-day communities cannot be used as a substitute. It belongs to a different evidential story. Another possibility is that the lineage did not vanish when the known fossils end. Homo Luzonensis may have survived into a later period in regions not yet excavated. Northern Luzon contains caves, river terraces, forests, and buried landscapes that remain poorly sampled. Coastal sites from lowered sea levels may now lie beneath water. Later bones may have dissolved in acidic soil or been too fragmentary to recognize. The apparent disappearance could therefore be partly an archaeological horizon rather than a biological event. Even if later fossils are found, they may not be easy to identify. Without a skull or complete skeleton, the diagnostic features of Homo Luzonensis rest heavily on teeth and selected hand and foot bones. A later isolated tooth might be assigned to Homo sapiens if preservation is poor, while a postcranial fragment could remain classified only as Homo. Museum collections may already contain overlooked material, just as CCH1 waited among animal remains before its importance was recognized. The species concept adds one final complication. If Homo Luzonensis evolved gradually from an island population related to Homo erectus, there may never have been a sharp beginning or ending. Small groups could change through time until later descendants no longer match the anatomy used to define the species. Alternatively, repeated arrivals might have blended with residents, transforming the population rather than extinguishing it. Taxonomic disappearance is not always the same as biological annihilation. No single explanation fully accounts for the silence after Callao. Demographic fragility, environmental disturbance, competition, assimilation, renewed migration, and poor preservation may all have contributed. The evidence cannot rank them confidently. A dramatic final scene would satisfy the desire for closure, but Luzon preserves no final night, no last refuge, and no witness to the moment when this lineage ceased to exist as a distinct population. What remains instead is a fading boundary. At one point, small teeth and unusual limb bones show that Homo Luzonensis was present. Later, the record belongs to other humans whose histories become gradually clearer. Between those worlds lies an interval archaeology has not illuminated. The lost humans of Luzon disappear not behind one catastrophe, but into missing layers, dissolved bone, submerged coastlines, and generations that left no durable mark. Their end may have been sudden or almost imperceptible. Until new evidence emerges, extinction itself remains the final unanswered behavior of a species known mainly through absence. The legacy of Homo Luzonensis begins with how little was required to overturn an old map of human evolution. 13 fossils from at least 3 individuals were enough to prove that Luzon once held a human population, unlike any previously recognized. 7 teeth, 2 finger bones, 3 foot or toe elements, and part of an immature femur do not provide a complete body. Yet together they force a larger conclusion. Pleistocene Asia was not occupied by one uniform succession of humans moving steadily toward the present. It contained isolated populations, repeated dispersals, local transformations, and lineages whose histories remain almost entirely unknown. Callao Cave changed the story first through CCH1, the foot bone identified after its recovery among animal remains. Its minimum age, near 66, the 700 years, demonstrated an unexpectedly early hominin presence on an island that had always required a sea crossing. Later discoveries justified the name Homo Luzonensis, but the chronology continued to expand. The reported age of approximately 134,000 years for CCH9 suggests that at least one Callao individual may have lived far earlier than the familiar range of 50,000 to 67,000 years. The result belongs to one tooth, not the entire collection, and it does not establish continuous occupation. Even so, it widens the possible history of the lineage and makes the gaps around it more important. The greatest of those gaps leads back to Kalinga. Around 709,000 years ago, unidentified hominins used stone tools to process a rhinoceros carcass in northern Luzon. More than 500,000 years separates that activity from the oldest currently reported Callao fossil. The Kalinga toolmakers may have been distant ancestors of Homo Luzonensis, members of an earlier population that vanished, or representatives of another migration altogether. The absence between the two sites prevents a secure answer, but it also reveals how misleading an apparently empty island record can be. A few discoveries, separated by enormous intervals, may be surviving points from a much denser history. The 2026 phylogenetic analysis gives the strongest current support to an origin near Asian Homo erectus. The dental evidence fits that relationship better than the image of an Australopith lineage surviving unchanged on Luzon. Under the favoured model, an erectus-related population reached the island and evolved in isolation. Reduced body size, founder effects, limited resources, forested terrain, and genetic drift may have produced the distinctive Callao anatomy. Some features that resemble earlier hominins could be examples of convergence or evolutionary reversal, rather than direct inheritance from a very ancient African dispersal. Yet even this improved model preserves uncertainty. The teeth and postcranial bones do not tell exactly the same evolutionary story. There is no skull to reveal brain size or facial form, no complete skeleton to establish stature, and no ancient DNA to test the proposed relationship. Island dwarfism remains plausible but unobserved as a sequence. Curved finger and toe bones may indicate climbing or frequent movement through steep, layered environments, but they do not prove an arboreal lifestyle. Science has moved closer to an explanation without arriving at a final genealogy. That incompleteness is itself part of the species' importance. Homo Luzonensis demonstrates that recognizable human diversity can survive in extremely small samples. It warns against treating the absence of fossils as the absence of populations. Tropical Asia preserves poorly. Shorelines have drowned, rivers have buried old surfaces, and many caves remain unexplored. The known species may represent only a fraction of the human lineages that entered the islands. Sulawesi, Flores, Java, and Luzon now suggest repeated movements across water, long before the maritime worlds of recent Homo sapiens. These crossings reshape assumptions about early human capability. They do not prove sophisticated navigation, planned colonization, or constructed boats. They show only that hominins reached islands that could not be entered on foot. Some crossings may have been accidental, others opportunistic, and still others more deliberate than the evidence can reveal. Whatever their form, successful arrivals created new evolutionary settings. Water-restricted contact. Small populations magnified chance, and island ecology pushed bodies along paths that did not resemble a simple continental sequence. The species also changes how comparisons are made. Homo floresiensis can no longer stand as the single strange island human of Southeast Asia, but neither should Homo Luzonensis be treated as its Philippine copy. Their teeth differ, their fossils differ, and their precise relationship remains unresolved. Denisovan ancestry in living Philippine populations adds another layer to regional prehistory, yet it cannot be assigned to the Callao lineage. Homo sapiens may have reached the broader region while Homo Luzonensis still survived, but no direct encounter, interbreeding event, or conflict has been demonstrated. The most responsible legacy is therefore not a finished portrait but a revised framework. Human evolution in Asia resembles a network of populations moving, separating, changing, and sometimes reconnecting. Homo erectus was likely not one static form. Island lineages could develop mixtures of traits that appear to belong to different ages. Modern humans entered landscapes already shaped by other hominins. Extinction, replacement, and assimilation may have occurred repeatedly, often without leaving evidence clear enough to distinguish them. It also changes the meaning of rarity. A species represented by so little material can seem marginal, as though it occupied only a brief and unimportant corner of prehistory. That impression confuses preservation with population history. Homo Luzonensis may have lived across wide parts of Luzon for tens of thousands of years, or in small pockets that shifted with climate and resources. Either possibility would leave few fossils in tropical conditions. The 13 known specimens are not a measure of how many lives were lived. They are a measure of how narrowly those lives passed through the filters of decay, burial, discovery, and recognition. Future discoveries could transform every part of their account. A skull from Luzon might reveal an unexpected brain case. Older teeth could connect Callao to Kalinga, or prove that several populations occupied the island. Proteins preserved in enamel might clarify ancestry where DNA has failed. A securely associated tool assemblage could finally reveal how Homo Luzonensis worked stone or other materials. Even one additional bone, recovered from the correct layer, might change estimates of locomotion, body size, or species boundaries. Until then, the name Homo Luzonensis marks both a discovery and a limit. It identifies a real human population through measurable anatomy, while refusing the illusion that 13 fossils can answer every question. These people crossed into an island world, persisted long enough to become distinct, and disappeared without leaving a known face. Their legacy is not that archaeology has reconstructed them completely. It is that their few surviving remains have made the missing parts of human history impossible to ignore. And so the story returns to the limestone hills of northern Luzon, where daylight narrows at the mouth of Callao Cave and the air cools beyond the entrance. Outside, forests move in rain and wind. Rivers continue cutting through the valley, carrying sediment over places where older traces may still lie buried. The cave does not explain the people whose bones entered it. It simply holds what time failed to destroy. Somewhere beyond those chambers, generations once learned the shape of the island. They knew paths that no map preserves, seasons that no calendar records, and shorelines now altered or drowned. They watched storms gather above mountains and found food in landscapes that would be unfamiliar today. Their world was complete to them, even though it reaches us as 7 teeth and a few pieces of hand, foot, and thigh. That contrast is worth holding quietly. A life does not become small because little of it survives. Whole relationships, memories, skills, journeys, and ordinary mornings can vanish while one tooth remains. Archaeology works backward from that imbalance, measuring what can be measured and leaving open what cannot. Sometimes the most honest reconstruction is a space carefully protected from certainty. Homo Luzonensis now has a name, but the name is only a lantern placed at the edge of a much larger darkness. It illuminates one branch, one cave, and a few moments separated by immense intervals. Beyond the light are the first crossing, the long transformation on the island, the possible connection to Kalinga, and the final generations whose fate left no clear mark. Perhaps future excavations will bring those shadows closer. Perhaps a skull will emerge from hardened sediment, or an older site will reveal the route between the rhinoceros carcass and Callao. Perhaps nothing more will be found, and these fragments will remain the entire known archive of a vanished people. Even then, their presence endures. The sea was crossed, the island was inhabited, a human lineage changed there, lived there, and became unlike every form science had recognized before. Long after its footsteps disappeared, the limestone kept a few small witnesses. In the darkness beneath Luzon, they wait without faces or voices, reminding us that the human story is always larger than the part that survives. Above the cave, stars still pass over the valley as they did before any remembered name, while rain enters the earth and time continues its patient work of concealment.